Interrupt the honourable member for statements by members, and the honourable member will have 5 minutes after QP to conclude and questions. Statements by members. Déclaration des députés. The honourable member for Don Valley East.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm so proud to stand here in the House of Commons today during Black History Month to recognize Canada's first Black parliamentarian. Mr. Leonard Brathwaite passed away in March 2012, but his legacy lives on, and I'm personally grateful for the path he paved for me and for many others. Mr. Brathwaite's career and commitment to this country was extraordinary. He served in World War II in the Canadian Air Forces, graduated from Harvard Business School, obtained a law degree from Osgoode Hall, practiced law, was elected as a school board trustee and city councillor, received the Order of Canada, served as a bencher in the Law Society of Upper Canada, and in 1963 he broke barriers when he became the first elected Black person in any parliamentarian serving at the Ontario Legislature. But he will be remembered most for ending segregation of schools here in Ontario and for welcoming women to serve as pages in the Ontario Legislature. Thank you, Mr. Brathwaite, for your commitment to building a better country and for inspiring so many Black Canadians who followed your path to serve.
The honourable member for Barrie, Springwater, Oro-Medonte.
Madam Speaker, I'm rising today to celebrate the accomplishment of a local hero in Barrie, Alex or Ali Massey. Ali, at the age of 16 and in his prime of athletics, was in a horrific wakeboarding accident that left his left leg amputated from the knee down. Ali was in the hospital for 13 weeks. During this recovery time, he was informed that he would no longer be able to pursue his much-loved sporting activities. Ali's determination and willpower did not allow him to accept this outcome. With the full and unwavering support of a loving and caring family, Ali persevered to continue with his sporting pursuits. Ali showed incredible perseverance and determination over many years, which has culminated in great success. On January 22nd this year, Ali and his teammate Tyler Turner won gold at the World Para Snow Sports Championships in Lillehammer, Norway, in the snowboard cross team event. I hope that this good news story encourages everyone, regardless of their abilities, to learn from Ali as an example of what can be accomplished with determination, courage, hard work, and a positive outlook. Great job, Ali. We will be cheering for you in the Paralympics. You're a true hero and inspiration to all.
Right on, Ali. The honourable member for Don Valley North.
Thank you, Speaker. Late last month, our North Shore community lost someone very special. Joan King was a community builder, an ardent supporter of local organizations, and an early champion for the environment, spearheaded issues like biodegradable bags. Joan was very engaging. She knew exactly how to bring people together and rally them behind an important issue. She never let politics get in the way of what was the best for her community. Joan served the people of North Shore tirelessly for over 20 years, first as school board trustee and then as a city councillor beginning back in 1985. Even after leaving City Council in 2000, Joan remained very involved and continued to advocate for our community. Joan made a lasting impact on our community, and I know that her memory will continue to inspire many of us for years to come. I'm very proud to have known her. Thank you, Speaker.
The honourable member for Drummond. Mr. Speaker, I would like to pay tribute today to the absolutely admirable work of Denis Villeneuve, an extraordinary director whose most recent film has received 10 Oscar nominations. Dune Part 1 is nominated for Best Picture, Best Adapted Screenplay, and Best Art Direction by Patrice Vermette. We are once again amazed by the extent of Villeneuve's genius, and we wish him and his team the best of luck at the Academy Awards. As one of our great filmmakers is honored in Hollywood, I can only think of Jean-Marc Vallée, who left us 2 months ago. He was the director of Crazy, Dallas Buyers Club, and Big Little Lies. Jean-Marc Vallée was masterful at portraying human nature. There is no doubt that he was one of the architects of the incredible growth in Quebec cinema and its international influence. He would certainly be proud to see the success today of his friend Denis Villeneuve. Thank you. The honourable member for Alfred Pelon. Mr. Speaker, only 40 years ago, one of my high school teachers organized a field trip to visit the Parliament in Ottawa. Little did she know the profound impact that visit had on my life. Indeed, this visit awakened my passion for politics and set me on the right path to proudly represent the citizens of Alfred Pelon today.
Profession knows no bound. I tip my hat to this noble profession, for teachers are artists who sculpt the mind of our youth to shape our future.
During this Teachers' Week, I would like to pay tribute to these talent creators who dedicate themselves to shaping the leaders of tomorrow. Thank you to all the school staff.
For our children.
The honourable member for Yellowhead.
Mr. Speaker, prior to my time in Parliament, I served in municipal government. I was encouraged to speak up on behalf of the people who put their trust in me. I am concerned I do not have the same freedom to ask legitimate questions about this government or popular narratives of society. In the past 2 years, many of the people in my riding have expressed concerns about their rights and freedom. We say every Canadian has individual rights and freedom, but our right to free speech is under attack. I'm not talking about hate speech, but about having your own opinion or questioning the government or society's popular narrative. For me, it seems if you ask questions about or don't agree with this narrative, your voice is shut down by hateful rhetoric, labeling you racist, misogynistic, or a conspiracy theorist. What has happened to our freedom of speech? I hope we all can work to reestablishing this core principle in our democratic society.
Honourable member for Beaches, East York.
We need to vaccinate the world to save lives, protect our economic recovery, and prevent the next variant. As it stands, of the 10 billion doses administered to date, only 10% have been administered in low-income countries. This not only falls short of our moral obligation to those who have less, it also means continued supply chain disruptions and the potential for a dangerous variant that could undo all of our sacrifice. We know that the best way to prevent the next variant is to stop unconstrained spread, and that requires vaccine equity. That's why I've introduced M43, to call on our government to expedite its committed donation of 200 million doses, to provide at least an additional 1.1 billion in the coming budget towards the ACT Accelerator, and to contribute to global manufacturing capacity, including support for the TRIPS waiver. When we look back at this time in history, we should see that Canada played a leading role in addressing global vaccine equity, the most important intervention to end the greatest crisis in our lifetimes. Having spent hundreds of billions on our own domestic pandemic response, we should spend a fraction of that to save lives around the world and to prevent the next variant.
The honourable member for Yukon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A unique collaboration between two remarkable Yukon women, Morgan Weinberg and Kelly Milner, is poised to change how the world looks at international orphanages and child exploitation. In 2010, after a devastating earthquake struck Haiti, a young high school graduate called Morgan Weinberg traveled to help. 10 years later, Morgan has slowly unraveled the story of corruption in many child orphanages, not just in Haiti, but around the world. While helping to reunite children with their rightful families, Morgan founded a small organization called Little Footprints, Big Steps, that aims to protect children coerced into so-called orphanages and reunite them with their families. This journey and Morgan's call to action to stop voluntourism and address human trafficking in orphanages around the world is explored in Yukon filmmaker Kelly Milner's documentary film, Not About Me. As Morgan and Kelly continue to raise this critical issue, it is time for us to rethink and reform our support for foreign orphanages. Thank you.
The honourable member for Souris Moose Mountain.
Mr. Speaker, February is Heart Month in Canada, and the Heart and Stroke Foundation is running their annual fundraising campaign. Approximately 750,000 Canadians face a daily struggle with heart failure. And last November, following a heart attack, I became one of them. I encourage everyone listening to learn and regularly review the signs and symptoms of a cardiac episode. Swift action and diagnosis could be a difference between life and death. I personally thought my symptoms were minimal, but I got checked out anyway, and thank goodness I did. I must recognize my doctors of Estvan, Dr. Sheikh and Dr. Choi, for their quick action and continued care. I would like to thank the staff of the Regina General Hospital Cardiac Care Unit, including the doctors, nursing staff, and technicians for your commitment to providing quality care for your patients. I would also like to specifically mention my cardiologist, Dr. Lavoie, and my angioplasty specialist, Dr. Booker. These incredible doctors are the reason why I am still here speaking to you today, and I cannot thank them enough. And finally, to those who say the politicians don't have a heart, I now have surgical proof I do.
The honourable member for Davenport.
Mr. Speaker, it's my pleasure to rise in this House today on an issue that's important to the residents of my riding of Davenport, childcare. Located in the downtown west part of Toronto, Davenport is still largely a working class to middle class riding, with many households struggling to make ends meet. Since the Government of Canada announced its ambition for a $10 a day early learning and childcare plan across the country, the federal government has signed agreements with every single province and territory except for Ontario. Indeed, in some provinces, families are seeing a reduction of overall childcare fees of 20% or more. At a time when the Canadian economy is struggling with higher costs largely due to global supply chain, every additional dollar makes a big difference. Our federal government has been and is willing, ready, and able to sign a deal with Ontario. On behalf of the residents of Davenport, I'm asking the province of Ontario to not waste any more time and step up to sign the childcare agreement that will deliver much-needed savings for the hardworking families of Davenport. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Dufferin-Caledon.
Mr. Speaker, COVID-19 has been absolutely devastating on Canadians. During the last election, the Prime Minister ran an extremely divisive campaign. And since that election, I've heard from so many Canadians and people in my riding. People who lost their jobs due to vaccine mandates. People who had to have their children vaccinated to play hockey. They're hurt, they're exhausted, they deserve better. Conservatives have been calling for a plan to stop dividing Canadians, a plan to lift restrictions and get us back to normal. Mr. Speaker, I am so proud that the member for Louis Hébert has shown so much leadership, recognizing the devastating consequences of lockdowns and the lack of a plan to move forward. If only the Prime Minister had the courage and the leadership shown by the member for Louis Hébert. Unfortunately, our country and Canadians will continue to suffer from his lack of leadership and his divisive attitude.
The honourable member for Calgary, Forest Lawn.
Mr. Speaker, I applaud the member for Louis Hébert's courage, who stood up to this tone-deaf Prime Minister, calling on his government to stop politicizing the pandemic and stop dividing Canadians. Those speaking out against the mandates and the restrictions are not white supremacists or extremists like the Prime Minister tries to label. They are everyday Canadians who just want a clear path forward out of this pandemic so they can get on with their lives. Canadians' lives, businesses, and mental health have all been devastated, and our Conservative team has been asking for this clear path forward for the last year. True leadership unites people, no matter their views. But this Prime Minister demonizes anyone who doesn't agree with his ideologies, calling people racist, even though he did blackface and kicked strong ethnic women out of his caucus who stood up against his corruption. It's time for this Prime Minister to stop politicizing the pandemic and start listening to Canadians who have suffered enough. Canadians need hope, they need leadership, and they need action now for a path forward out of the mandates and restrictions. We all owe it to Canadians to keep our land united, strong, and free.
The honourable member for Brampton South.
Mr. Speaker, supporting small businesses is very important, especially during COVID-19. Last month, our city received a grant of $945,000 from the program. My Main Street Local Businesses Accelerator Program. This will go forward supporting and improving 6 Main Street businesses communities in Brampton. Residents of Brampton know how important our small businesses is to our city. People go to them for a cup of coffee or shop for new clothes and together with their families for meals. But like so many businesses, they were hit hard by the pandemic. This is why this grant will help to rebuild them across the city. Our government recognizes how uncertainty and COVID have impacted small businesses. which is why programs like My Main Street and other have been developed to help others support and grow their businesses in Brampton and across the country. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Nanaimo Ladysmith.
Mr. Speaker, Pat, a senior in Nanaimo Ladysmith, is one of many seniors, being punished for rightfully accessing CERB. As a result of GIS clawbacks, she is now left with a budget of only $70 a week for groceries. Since the clawbacks, she's barely been able to keep food in her fridge. Organizations in my riding of Nanaimo Ladysmith, such as Nanaimo Family Life, are working tirelessly to support vulnerable seniors throughout the pandemic. One of their frontline staff recently told me the GIS clawbacks were like pouring gasoline on an already dire situation for low-income seniors who are struggling with the affordability crisis. Pat and others like her should not be held responsible for the government's mistakes. It is time for this government to do what is right and put this much-needed income back into the pockets of seniors now.
The honourable member for Manicouagan. Mr. Speaker, 20 years ago yesterday, Grand Chief Ted Moses and Premier Bernard Landry signed the Paix des Brèves, a historic agreement between the Crees and the government of Quebec. 20 years ago, the Crees and Quebec began a crucial economic partnership for our two nations. But above all, we officially entered into a true nation-to-nation relationship based on respect. 20 years later, the relationship between the Cree Nation and the Quebec Nation is not a foregone conclusion. It must be maintained. The Paix des Brèves was not unanimous, but it does not erase history, and it is not reconciliation. But it is clear that this agreement marked an economic, social, and diplomatic turning point. With the signing of a modern treaty like this is neither the birth nor the conclusion of a path to self-determination for Indigenous peoples, but it may be a giant step forward. And 20 years later, it is still in this spirit that we must look to our common future. Thank you.
The honourable member for Regina Louvain.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's been an eventful several weeks in Ottawa, but earlier today, Canadians witnessed a moment of true courage from the Liberal member from Louis-Hébert and the chair of the Quebec Liberal Caucus when he spoke out against the Prime Minister's dividing and stigmatizing Canadians. It's also encouraging that other members of the Liberal Caucus may have also seen the light. Their Quebec Caucus chair said, and I quote, "I can assure you, I'm not the only one to have certain discomfort on different levels which the direction of this government is taking. Canadians have been looking for leadership from this Prime Minister, and we can see from the protests outside he's still hiding. So I encourage all my colleagues on the Liberal benches to speak out against the Prime Minister's divisive approach and discrimination against Canadians. Because after all, as this Prime Minister said, a Canadian is a Canadian is a Canadian.
The honourable member for Dorval-Lachine-LaSalle. Mr. Speaker, as you know, February is Black History Month. Today, I would like to pay tribute to an exceptional Canadian woman, the legendary singer Eleanor Collins. This 100-year-old Canadian jazz great was born in Edmonton in Alberta, had an illustrious career performing on numerous variety shows. She was the first Canadian woman to have her own TV show on CBC.
Barrière interraciale, ouvrant la voie à plus de diversité sur la scène artistique et dans le monde du divertissement. La musique d'Eleanor Collins a...
Her music was of different origins. It united people. The music has the power to transmit messages of love and to affect us very deeply. Eleanor contributed by bringing beauty to our lives. Thank you.
Oral questions. Question orale. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Lockdowns and mandates, we're seeing things change very quickly, and rightly so. Dr. Tam has said that vaccine mandates should be reevaluated, and today the chair of the Quebec Liberal Caucus clearly and strongly stated it's time to end the divisiveness and the politicization and end the mandates. We Conservatives could not agree more. This cannot be a slow and dragged out process simply because of the Prime Minister's ego, pride, or denial. Canadians are too tired. Canadians need hope. So will the Prime Minister follow the science, follow the evidence, and the restrictions and the mandates?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, everyone is sick and tired of lockdowns, of the measures we have to do, of the sacrifices we've had to make. But Canadians have continued to step up over the past 2 years, been there for each other, been there to get vaccinated. And that's the unity we've seen across the country of people who've been there for their neighbours, who've been there for their frontline health workers. That's what Canadians are going to continue to do. That's how we get through and back to the things we love. We're going to continue to follow the science. We're going to continue to have Canadians' backs. We're going to continue to protect people's lives.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Speaker, countries like Ireland, Sweden, Norway, Israel, Czech Republic, the UK, Spain, Denmark, they're all removing restrictions and mandates, and they're all countries that have a lower vaccine rate than Canada. Here in Canada, though, we have a Prime Minister who refuses to lead and instead is being divisive. I have to agree with the MP for Louis Hébert when he says, people don't know where public health ends and politics begins. Canadians want their lives back. So again, I ask the Prime Minister, will he follow the evidence? Will he follow the science and the mandates and the restrictions quickly?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, every step of the way, we have had Canadians' backs by following the science, by working closely with
Order. Now, the Honourable Leader of the Opposition asked a question, and she's trying to hear, but she can't hear it above all the heckling and shouting that's going on. So I'm going to ask everyone to just keep it down so she can hear the answer coming from the Prime Minister, the Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, from the beginning of this pandemic, we have followed science, we have had Canadians' backs, and we've actually seen a less severe impact on lives, on livelihoods, and our economy than many other countries, including the ones that the Leader of the Opposition named. We will continue to follow the science. We will continue to lean on each other as Canadians as we make it through this pandemic. We know that it's tiring, we know it's exhausting, but we also know that having each other's backs is the way through this pandemic.
The Leader of the Opposition.
Speaker, the Prime Minister has politicized the pandemic and been divisive, and even his own members are seeing it. Now, countries around the world are opening up, and even here in Canada, provinces are opening up. They're following the science and the evidence, whether it's Dr. Henry in BC, Dr. Moore in Ontario. They all agree we have to learn to live with COVID. Conservatives believe that living with COVID means opening up and ending the mandates, and I believe there are some Liberals who believe the same thing. So will the Prime Minister follow the science and the lockdowns and let Canada once again be the true North, strong and free?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'm extremely pleased to hear the Conservatives finally talking about following science, because that's something that they have fallen down on throughout this pandemic, whether it was not choosing to get vaccinated, whether it's continuing to debate over the effectiveness of public health measures. Fortunately, we've been working with provincial premiers right across the country to bring in the kinds of restrictions, the kinds of mandates that have saved Canadians' lives. Unfortunately, we see Conservatives continuing to both call an end to the protests from in here and support them out there. They need to be more responsible leaders to get through this and to play less politics.
The Honourable Member for Mégantic-L'Érable. Mr. Speaker, the truth came out this morning. I would like to cite the member for Louis Hébert and the chair of the Quebec Liberal Caucus. He regrets to see that the tone of his leader has changed since the campaign. He used to be trying to bring people together, but now he has made the choice to stigmatize and divide people. Did the Prime Minister make that decision himself to divide the population so he could win the election? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, this government's pandemic decisions were made to save lives. And now we see that Canadians got vaccinated at record levels. We lead the world in vaccination rates because Canadians know that being there for each other is the best way to get through this pandemic. I understand that people are frustrated. We want to be done with this, and the way to do that is to follow science and not play political games like the Conservative Party unfortunately does. The Honourable Member for Mégantic, L'Érable. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister is not answering my question. One of his own MPs, the member for Louis Hébert, is asking for vaccine mandates to be ended. He believes that his government's decisions do not rest on enough scientific data. He was very clear. Someone in this government deliberately decided to adopt a divisive and stigmatizing approach. Was that decision to politicize the COVID-19 crisis for partisan purposes? Was that decision taken by the Prime Minister himself, yes or no? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, I entirely disagree with my colleague. This government's decisions were decisions made to keep people safe, to be able to get through this pandemic. With vaccine mandates, which in fact are enabling us to have fewer restrictions, because they let us get back to doing the things we love once we're vaccinated. Unfortunately, the Conservatives have been fighting that from the beginning, but we are here to encourage vaccination, to ensure that we can get through this pandemic, because we are all sick of it. We all want to be done with it, but the way to do that is by following science. The Honourable Member for Belleuil-Chambly. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The situation is not at all ideal, but there has been progress. The injunction has not entirely restored calm, but it has reduced the honking. Quebec City collaborated with the government of Quebec and paved the way on how to deal with the protests. The Prime Minister is back here in the House. That's a good thing. And a crisis unit was created. Now, a crisis unit is the means to an end, but it's not an end in itself. And it has to be accountable to authorities such as Parliament. Has the Prime Minister put into place any measures to ensure that by Friday, Wellington Street and the parliamentary precinct will be freed up? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, Canadians have been fighting this pandemic for 2 years. They are tired. We have heard their message. Now, we need to ensure that people in Ottawa can get back to their normal lives. We are doing everything we can to help Ottawa, the City of Ottawa, get the situation under control. I will be speaking with Mayor Watson once again this afternoon to discuss how we can support them. My goal is to help the people of Ottawa to receive the support that they deserve. And we must all show solidarity in getting through this challenge. The Honourable Member. Mr. Speaker, we must ensure that on Friday we don't start another weekend like the last two. Another voice has been added to those of Quebec and the provinces. According to the member for Louis Hébert, the government's position on healthcare transfers is untenable. Increasingly, we see that a stronger healthcare system would have reduced the need for restrictive measures and perhaps could have reduced what we're seeing out in the street today. Will this Prime Minister reconsider our proposal to hold a summit on healthcare funding? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, the leader of the Bloc Québécois knows very well that summits on healthcare are not held with the Bloc Québécois, but with provincial premiers. And we are continuing to talk to premiers. In addition to the $43 billion that we transfer yearly for healthcare, the federal government over the last 2 years has invested $63 billion additional dollars in healthcare because of the pandemic. And we will continue to be there right away to invest in health, but also in the years to come to support the provinces and their healthcare systems. The Honourable Member for Burnaby South.
We have truckers that are stuck at the Coots border crossing in Alberta. We have truckers that are stuck at the Ambassador Bridge crossing in Windsor. We've got protests breaking out across the country. And here in Ottawa, there is with the 12th day of the occupation, all because of the Convoy protests. And I've spoken with some of the residents in Ottawa and small businesses who tell me they're feeling terrified, they're intimidated, and they feel abandoned by the government. People who feel abandoned want to know, what has the Prime Minister done to help out people in this crisis since it's begun?
Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, every step of the way we've been there to offer support and assistance to the City of Ottawa as it deals with this. We've been working closely with the province to ensure that resources get to the City of Ottawa to be able to handle this protest. We will continue to be there to support not just the citizens of Ottawa who are impacted by this protest, but also folks across the country, including hardworking truckers stuck at border crossings because of protests that are affecting and impacting and limiting their fellow citizens. So I call upon the Conservative Party to be consistent and in here and out there call to an end of these protests.
The honourable member for Burnaby South.
Mr. Speaker, there are truckers who are stuck at the Coutts border and the Windsor border. And we're on day 12 of the occupation of Ottawa. All because of the convoy protests. This situation is not tenable. I have spoken with people and small businesses in Ottawa, and they have told me that they are scared, intimidated, and harassed by the protesters. They feel that they've been abandoned by this government. What has this Prime Minister done concretely to help people in this crisis? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, from the beginning of this crisis, we have been working with the City of Ottawa and with the province to ensure that they have all the necessary resources to end these protests. We know that it's not just residents of Ottawa, but especially residents of Ottawa, but also truckers and people throughout the country who are being affected by these protests. These protests that are harming our economy and our fellow citizens. That is why we will continue to be there to support science, to support the police services, and to end both the protests and the pandemic.
Canada's Prime Minister is pandering to politics by division, stoking anger and fear. The rhetoric he used towards those Canadians who support lifting the mandate adds fuel to the fire. These are not the actions of a Prime Minister. A senior member of the Liberal caucus has publicly criticized his tone, his language, and his approach to the pandemic. Will the Prime Minister act like a Prime Minister? Will he listen to the opposition, listen to his own caucus? Will he listen to Canadians? Or will he continue with this divisive rhetoric?
The Honourable Minister of Public Safety.
Beginning of the pandemic, our government has been laying out with great transparency what we believe is the best way out of this pandemic, and that's vaccinations. And I want to give credit to the 90% of Canadians who've taken up that cause, the 90% of truckers who've taken up the cause of vaccinations to ensure that the wheels of our economy continue to turn. As for those who are outside, Mr. Speaker, this government is working very closely with the City of Ottawa to provide the police all of the tools and the resources that they need to end this convoy as quickly and as peacefully as possible. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable member for Foothills.
Canadians, including a senior member of the Liberal caucus, are speaking loud and clear.
I'm going to have to ask the honourable member for Foothills to stop while his members on his side are heckling him. So I'll let him continue now. The honourable member for Foothills.
Canadians, including senior members of the Liberal caucus, are speaking loud and clear. Canadians are looking for pandemic leadership. Canadians are standing up right now, grabbing this moment in our history, because they know there is something fundamentally wrong when a Prime Minister refuses to listen. Countries around the world are changing direction, but here in Canada, our Prime Minister resorts to playground antics and calling names. If ever there was a time for inspired leadership, it is now. Will the Prime Minister grow up? Will he do his job? Will he listen to Canadians?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm very pleased and grateful for the members' use of pandemic leadership. This is exactly that, this pandemic leadership, Mr. Speaker. We all have the responsibility to work together, to listen to each other, to listen to science, what science has told us, and what science...
I'm going to have to interrupt the Honourable Minister of Health. I'm having a hard time hearing him, and I really wanted to hear the answer, as I'm sure the Honourable Member for Foothills, who asked the question, would like to hear the answer. I'm going to ask the Honourable Minister to start right from the top so we can hear the whole answer, please.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'm glad to do that because I thought the question was the right statement. They spoke about leadership, pandemic leadership. That's exactly the point, Mr. Speaker. We need to be leader in managing the pandemic. We need to be united together, working together, listening to each other. We have a hard job to do, Mr. Speaker, which is to look after the health of millions of Canadians who depend on us to protect their health and the health of those that they love.
Le député de Charlebourg, Haute-Saint-Charles.
The Honourable Member for Charlebourg, Haute-Saint-Charles. Mr. Speaker, this morning we heard from the chair of the Liberal Quebec caucus. And according to him, we're right. We've been asking for a more united approach, an approach that is based on science. But the Prime Minister is demonizing those who disagree with him. Will he finally end petty politics, which is just making the situation worse? The Honourable Minister of Health. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I'd like to thank my colleague from the Quebec City region who knows my colleague for Louis Hébert and who knows in what esteem we hold him and his hard work. My colleague spoke about unity, and that's a great word to use because we are united in Canada. We are united in fighting this pandemic. And what brings us together, what unites us, is vaccination, Mr. Speaker. It works. 99% of public servants are vaccinated, and they are not only protected for themselves, but they protect others. The Honourable Member for Charlebourg, Haute-Saint-Charles. Mr. Speaker, this morning the member for Louis Hébert and chair of the Quebec Liberal caucus was clear. He asked his own government to create a roadmap, a game plan to see where we're going with this. That's what we've been asking this Prime Minister for 2 years. But nothing, no results. Instead, the Prime Minister has preferred to politicize this pandemic. He doesn't like to listen to advice either from the opposition or even from his own MPs. Many Canadians agree with us. Will he finally understand what they're saying, stop dividing people, and create a road plan, just as the member for Louis Hébert has asked? The Honourable Minister. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My colleague is right to say that indeed we've had a plan for 2 years since the beginning of the pandemic. And it has worked. It has avoided deaths. Thanks to the measures we've brought in, thanks to listening to the science, we can deduce that we have saved about 50,000 lives if we compare with what we've seen south of the border. We've also helped support the economy. But I must say that if we had listened to the opposition's advice, we would be in an economic crisis and we wouldn't be able to recover.
A year ago, the Prime Minister rejected vaccine mandates, calling them extreme measures that could have real divisive impacts on our community and country. Since then, no one has created more division than the Prime Minister, pitting Canadian against Canadian and using vaccine status as a dangerous political weapon. In the words of a senior Liberal today, now that we have one of the most vaccinated populations in the world, we've never been so divided. When will the Prime Minister stop dividing Canadians and end his punitive vaccine mandates?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Merci, Monsieur le Président, et j'apprécie particulièrement.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I do appreciate these remarks about vaccine status. When I get vaccinated, I do it for myself, but not just for myself. I do it for my parents as well, for example. When I go visit my parents, knowing that I'm vaccinated, I know I'm protecting them. When my son gets vaccinated, I know he's protected, and I'm happy about it. And I also know that he's protecting everyone around him. So it's not just a very important personal decision that we take when we have the right vaccine status. It also means we are reaching out to protect those around us.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister is double vaccinated, had his booster, and just contracted COVID-19. So using mandates to discriminate against Canadians based on their vaccine status is absolutely punitive and discriminatory. A senior Liberal called on the Prime Minister to stop dividing Canadians on the issue of vaccine status. When will the Prime Minister start listening to the science, start listening to public health officials, start listening to his own members of Parliament, and end his campaign of discrimination and division against Canadians?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, I wish to speak with respect, but also with honesty. I'm a bit troubled by what I hear, which is the belief that vaccination doesn't work. Mr. Speaker, vaccination does work. About a year ago, science gave us the gift of vaccination. We had waited for that for an entire year, Mr. Speaker. Since then, we have millions of Canadians have chosen to do the right thing, which is to get vaccinated. I'm very troubled by the fact that on the opposite side of this House, there are still people that don't believe in vaccination.
Your attention, please. Thank you. Okay. I just want to remind everyone that we're in question period and we want to hear the question and the answers. We have l'honorable député de...
The Honourable Member for Avignon-la-Métis-Matane-Matapédia. Mr. Speaker, for 12 days, downtown Ottawa has been besieged, and this situation is not going to end on its own. Yesterday in his speech, we heard that the Prime Minister's plan to finish the crisis was just to tell occupants to go get vaccinated. Well, I have a scoop for him. At this point, these people are not going to get vaccinated. So what are we going to do apart from complain about the occupants? What measures will he take? What deadline is he going to give them? When will he finally realize that magical thinking will not empty Ottawa's roads? The Honourable Minister of Public Safety. Mr. Speaker, from the very beginning, the federal government has been there to support law enforcement and Ottawa Police Services by providing 275 RCMP officers. The RCMP is ready to provide additional support to Ottawa Police. As Mayor Watson asked, I will be speaking with him and the entire team that we have on this side of the House, and we will continue to work in close collaboration with the city to provide all the resources they need. The Honourable Member for Avignon-la-Métis-Matane-Matapédia. Mr. Speaker, it's day 12 of the occupation of Ottawa, and the federal government still isn't taking strong action to end this crisis. Yesterday, the Minister of Public Safety said that he was proud that his government had done everything it could from the beginning of the crisis to make sure that the law was respected. He was saying that to highlight that his government placed 275 RCMP officers at Ottawa's disposal, but the city of Ottawa is asking for 1,800, so they only got 15% of that. Is that really all the government can do after 12 days of this siege? The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, I am indeed proud of what the government has done during the pandemic. And in addition, I am very proud of our contribution of all RCMP officers on the ground to help Ottawa Police Services, which is doing good work at the moment with great progress over the last 2 days, and we now need to end this convoy. The government will be working closely with the City of Ottawa to accomplish that. The Honourable Member for Avignon-la-Métis-Matane-Matapédia. Mr. Speaker, it's not surprising that this siege is going on and on. On the one hand, we have a Minister of Public Safety who waited 11 days before creating a crisis unit and who is refusing to fully deploy the RCMP. And on the other hand, we have a prime minister who still thinks that the occupants are going to listen to him and say, oh, well, I guess he's right. We're going to go home and we're going to get vaccinated. That's what the Liberal Party's crisis management skills look like. So it's not that surprising at this point that the member for Louis Hébert is coming out against his government. What's really surprising is that he's the only one to do it. When will this government finally wake up? The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, maybe my colleague didn't see the news. From the beginning, we offered resources, we added officers to help Ottawa Police Services, the police force that has jurisdiction in Ottawa, and we will continue to work closely with the city, with the Government of Ontario, and with all stakeholders in order to resolve the situation.
Cumberland Colchester.
Mr. Speaker, I remember clearly in March 2020 making a pandemic plan for my regional hospital. At that time and ever since, this government has been too little, too late, or not at the right time. Canadians need hope for their futures. When, Mr. Speaker, is this Liberal government going to show leadership and give Canadians a much-needed plan to learn to live with COVID-19?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, thank you to you and thank you to my colleague for raising that important question. We've been working together since March 2020 to fight the biggest, largest health crisis in 100 years in Canada. We've gone through that crisis successfully, certainly with respect to many other countries in the world, and that's because we have worked together, we have helped each other, provinces and territories, the federal government. We have invested $8 out of 10 in total economic support, $63 billion of health and safety investments, in addition to all of the other investments that we've making for many years.
For Cumberland Colchester.
Mr. Speaker, most provincial medical officers of health have begun to speak of living with COVID, and even Health Canada's own Dr. Tam has said the virus will be endemic. Nova Scotia's Dr. Strang has spoken of initial steps needed to move forward. When will this government rely on science, not the spin doctors, and the advice of its own experts, and remove lockdowns, restrictions, and mandates? Give Canadians the date.
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A very key signal, I should say, Mr. Speaker. To be against vaccination is to be in favor of lockdowns. The only way to fight lockdowns is to be in favor of vaccination. That's why, Mr. Speaker, I would again invite all the opposition members, including the new Conservative leader, to exert new leadership and ask all members of the Conservative Party to be vaccinated. That's the only way to avoid lockdowns.
The Honourable Member for Thornhill.
Mr. Speaker, a senior Liberal has shared their concerns that the government mandates are divisive and harmful to the Canadian people. The Prime Minister and his government need to stop politicizing the pandemic because it's fracturing our society and dividing Canadians. Yes. Will the Prime Minister listen to the voices within his own party and present Parliament and the rest of Canada with something, anything, to end the mandates and end the restrictions and allow us to start living with COVID?
Hear, hear.
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'll say something which my honourable colleague already knows most likely, is that the lockdown measures to which she refers are provincial decisions made by provinces and territories. I believe no one in this House is confused between federal and provincial responsibilities. The federal responsibility has been and will be there to support provinces and territories moving forward.
The Honourable Member for Thornhill.
Mr. Speaker, somebody needs to tell the minister that it's 2022. The redundant PCR testing and asymptomatic fully vaccinated travelers doesn't make any sense. Permanent travel restrictions are not the answer because the current ones are ineffective. The government's duplicative arrival testing regime is out of step with the world. It takes up to a week for those results. That means forced quarantines, high costs for families. Yeah. When will the government join our allies and drop these ineffective travel restrictions?
Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And working with our allies is exactly what we had to do and what we did. We've obviously worked with the United States, which is our closest ally, very successfully over the last few months. Now, the mandates to which she refers, the border mandates, in particular regarding vaccination, are entirely symmetrical and aligned with what the United States are doing, and will continue to work with our allies.
I just want to remind the honourable members, Order. I just want to remind the honourable members that some of you don't realize how strong your voice is. Even if you're muffled with your face mask, it really echoes through. And I mean, I would just ask people to respect each other and not shout at each other.
Sorry, Speaker.
Apology accepted. The honourable member for Cowichan, Malahat, Langford.
Mr. Speaker, on the Liberal government's watch, online platforms were used to fund the ongoing occupation in Ottawa. Millions of dollars have been raised for Convoy organizers whose stated purpose is to overthrow the government. Canadians are rightly concerned that these platforms have become tools used to help foreign actors undermining our democracy. In response to the lack of federal leadership, I brought a motion to the Public Safety Committee to examine how this could be allowed to happen. Will the government ensure that foreign funds and anonymous donations are never again used to help those attacking our democracy?
Honourable Minister of Public Safety.
Mr. Speaker, I want to begin by thanking my honourable colleague for his question and for the impending work which he will do in conjunction with the Committee on Standing Public Safety Matters. I think this is a very important matter, and certainly over the course of the last number of days, we have seen GoFundMe take appropriate actions, asking the right questions about where certain funds were coming for, what they would be used for. And certainly to the extent that the committee will be looking at this issue very closely, I think we all need to be seized with the landscape as it exists around foreign interference and any funds which may be used to undermine public safety. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Edmonton Strathcona.
Mr. Speaker, the minister talks about being seized with urgency, but it is 12 days that healthcare workers, small business owners, and Ottawa residents and others have been harassed by some members of the convoy. Far-right extremists in the U.S. and elsewhere are trying to bring their radical views to Canada. They're funding extremists, they're empowering racism and anti-Semitism, and they're threatening to overthrow our government. Why has it taken so long to respond to this ongoing crisis and the foreign-funded interference that is threatening our citizens, our country, and our democracy?
Minister for Public Safety.
I want to assure my colleague, Mr. Speaker, that we have very strong laws to prevent the kind of illegal conduct that she has referred to. Any funds that would go towards undermining public safety, national security, or indeed our democracy will be taken with the utmost seriousness by our law enforcement as well as our intelligence community. Mr. Speaker, I look forward to the work that the committee will do. We will receive the report in this chamber, and we will continue to unite around the need to ensure that our laws are upheld. Yes, we will have vigorous debates, but always in accordance with the rule of law. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Kitchener-Conestoga.
Mr. Speaker, the COVID-19 pandemic has emphasized to my constituents in Kitchener-Conestoga and to all Canadians how crucial it is to have access to reliable and affordable high-speed internet. Investments in broadband connectivity create jobs and improve access to online learning and healthcare services. Can the Minister of Rural Economic Development provide an update to this House on the government's project in delivering high-speed internet across this country? Thanks, Mr. Speaker.
Minister for Rural Economic Development.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to thank my friend and colleague for that wonderful question. Throughout the pandemic, families and businesses without access to affordable and high-speed internet were faced with additional challenges, accessing online learning, putting their businesses online, and connecting with loved ones. But, Mr. Speaker, in the last few weeks alone, we've announced over $8 million in funding to projects to connect an additional 4,000 households all throughout rural Canada. We have a plan to connect every Canadian to high-speed internet all across the country, and we're delivering on that plan, Mr. Speaker.
L'honorable député de Beauce.
The honourable member for Beauce. Mr. Speaker, the cost of living crisis continues to affect Beauce residents on a daily basis. With record inflation, Canadians are struggling to make ends meet. The lack of leadership is astounding. The price of gas has increased to over $1.60 now in our region of Beauce. Groceries have shot up 5 to 7%, which is the equivalent of $1,000 for a family of 4. Why isn't the government looking for ways to help Canadians through the final stages of this pandemic? The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, we will not be lectured by the Conservatives when it comes to helping the most vulnerable Canadians deal with the cost of living. We have implemented benefits that are indexed, the CPP, and we have helped to raise millions of children out of poverty. And that the child benefit is also indexed to inflation. And that we have helped seniors in the same way. The Honourable Member for Beauce. Mr. Speaker, all this government does is stick to its talking points. Sure, $10 a day is welcome, and seniors get the GIS, but let's be honest, indexation falls far short of inflation these days. What does this government have to say to seniors in my riding who are barely able to make ends meet? When will this government wake up and make a serious effort instead of collecting more and more taxes to cover their own overspending? The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister. Once again, the Conservatives keep perpetuating a false dialogue. The fact is, Canada is resilient and our economy is recovering well from the COVID recession. Our GDP has grown by over 5%. The U.S., Japan, the UK, and Australia have all been faring worse.
Lake Country.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Polls say that fewer than 1 in 5 Canadians expect their financial situation to improve this year. Almost 60% of Canadians are having a tough time putting food on their table, and the average family grocery bill will go up $1,000 this year. Constituents are emailing me copies of the highest home heating bills they have ever received, and payroll taxes will take about $700 off the average family's paychecks this year. People are being squeezed. Why is this government not addressing the unmanageable squeeze that is being put on hard-working families, making it difficult every day to just pay for basic necessities?
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister.
Our government will take no lessons from the Conservatives when it comes to supporting the most vulnerable Canadians. It was our government that introduced the CCB, which is indexed for inflation, and which has already lifted almost 300,000 children out of poverty. It's our government that increased the GIS. That is also indexed to inflation, Mr. Speaker, and it has helped over 900,000 seniors. When we formed government in 2015, more than 5 million Canadians lived in poverty. Mr. Speaker, by 2019, that number had dropped to 3.7 million.
The Honourable Member for King Vaughan.
Mr. Speaker, in my riding of King Vaughan, constituents are concerned with keeping their homes. Years ago, I worked in banking and met many people returning the keys to their house because they simply couldn't afford to make the payments with the skyrocketing interest rates. What has this government done to ensure we don't go back to the 80s and 90s where we saw many Canadians lose their homes?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, every Canadian deserves a safe and affordable place to call home. And since 2015, our government has invested nearly $30 billion for affordable housing, brought in Canada's first ever national housing strategy. And we have a plan of over $72 billion, which has already helped over 1 million Canadians find the home that they need. We have more work to do, and we will work with provinces and territories, including municipalities as well, to make sure that we build more housing supply to ensure that every Canadian has a safe and affordable place to call home.
The Honourable Member for Salaberry-sur-Roi. Mr. Speaker, for the past 8 months, the government has been cutting the guaranteed income supplement for seniors who got the CERB. We're talking about seniors who need to work part-time to pay for basics like rent and medication. This morning, after 8 months, the government introduced a bill to correct this injustice. But do you know when it comes into effect, Mr. Speaker? In June. Mr. Speaker, if the situation of these seniors is serious enough to warrant legislation, why is the government continuing to cut them off until June?
Mr. Speaker, we know just how difficult this pandemic has been on seniors, and on this side of the House, Mr. Speaker, we've been there to support them. And as announced in the fiscal update, we will be delivering a one-time payment to fully compensate those affected in 2020. And today we introduced Bill C-12 to exclude any pandemic benefits for the purposes of calculating GIS going forward. And I hope that we can count on all parties' support to quickly pass this bill to prevent any future reduction in GIS for low-income vulnerable seniors who took pandemic benefits. I hope we can all get behind this. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Salaberry-sur-Roi. Mr. Speaker, by the time the government stops cutting the GIS for seniors, they will have been deprived of the bare minimum for 11 months. 11 months. In those 11 months, inflation has had time to reach a 30-year high. During those 11 months, seniors have had to leave more and more food on the shelves at the grocery store because they can't afford it. Their rent probably went up. For 11 months, all their expenses went up while the government cut back their benefits. Is this how seniors deserve to be treated?
Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, our government's priority has been there to support those most vulnerable, especially those seniors. And that's why we worked so hard to strengthen income security for seniors, including the increases to the GIS. That has helped over 900,000 low-income seniors. And that is why also we introduced Bill C-12 to exclude pandemic benefits for the purposes of calculating GIS going forward. We're also making a major investments through a one-time payment for seniors affected. Mr. Speaker, on this side of the House, we will always be there for seniors.
Member for Fundy Royal.
Mr. Speaker, 130 days. That's how long it's been since this government has refused to fill the position of the federal ombudsman for victims of crime. To be clear, the ombudsman's job is to make sure the federal government meets its responsibilities to victims. This government is still pushing ahead with legislation that makes life easier for violent criminals by eliminating mandatory jail time, all while this critical role for victims is being silenced. Can the minister tell this House why this important position remains empty?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the honourable member for his question. Indeed, we share that concern for helping, protecting, and working with victims of crime to ensure that the criminal justice system works not only more efficiently, but more empathetically and compassionately with respect.
Just a minute, we have a point of order. The honourable member for Salaberry-sur-Roi. Mr. Speaker, the interpret points out that she can't interpret because the sound is not of sufficient quality.
Minister of Justice, maybe do that over again and make sure his mic is in the right place. And I believe there's some issues with our internet service here at the House we're going to have to look into. But I'll let him do that again or repeat that, and hopefully we can hear it. The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I am using all the House of Commons equipment as I am supposed to. I thank the honourable member for his question, and I share his concern about helping, supporting.
I'm going to interrupt the Honourable Minister of Justice. It sounds like you're using a microphone, but it's not the one that's on your headset. That's a common error. I'll let him fix that. Unfortunately, we won't be able to hear an answer on that. Oh, I'm sorry. The Minister of Public Safety will take the answer while the technical issue is being taken care of.
Welcome, Mr. Speaker. I know how excited they are to hear from me. I think we can all relate to the technical difficulties at one point or another. I think what my colleague, the Minister of Justice, would say is that we're obviously very concerned with filling this position as quickly as possible so that there is an ombudsperson in place, and we will make sure that we do that. Thank you very much.
The honourable member for Fundy Royal.
Mr. Speaker, no matter who answers, the message is the same. Victims don't matter to this government. Leaving the ombudsman position empty is a deliberate decision by this government. In 2016, they immediately replaced the outgoing ombudsman for federal offenders, but they won't show the same respect for victims. But we shouldn't be surprised that these Liberals put the rights of criminals ahead of victims yet again. The mandated review for the Victims' Bill of Rights is already a year overdue. The message this Justice Minister sends over and over to victims is clear. You don't matter. So again, I'll ask, when can victims expect the ombudsman position to be filled?
Honourable Minister for Public Safety.
Mr. Speaker, I'm very proud of the work that this government continues to do to uphold victims' rights. In fact, this government restored many of the cuts that were made under the last Conservative government as a way of demonstrating the concrete, tangible support for victims. We will continue to use our open, transparent, and merit-based process of filling this position, and I know that is something that the Minister of Justice is very much seized with. Thank you.
The honourable member for Lakeland.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the truth is that these Liberals are soft on crime and words and actions. It has been 4 months. Victims of crime do matter, and they can't be swept away like not yet again one of these Liberal scandals. Silke from Bonnyville is scared and feels unsafe in her own home. She says, with every stranger we look out the window, a false alarm from our shop sensor gives us adrenaline overload. Every slow driving vehicle makes our hair stand up. That's normal in Lakeland. It's been 4 months. When will the Liberals appoint the federal ombudsman for victims of crime?
The honourable Minister for Public Safety.
I share the sentiments of my honourable colleague and understand that it's important that victims have an office in which they can approach. And that is why I know the Minister of Justice will appoint this position as quickly as possible. In the meantime, this government will continue to invest in all of the resources, the supports that are needed for victims. We know that throughout the pandemic, there has been an alarming increase in gender-based violence, and we will always be there to support victims. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Madawaska-Restigouche. Mr. Speaker, infrastructure investments are investments in strong, healthy communities. Investing in important local projects ensures that New Brunswick families, residents, and businesses have the infrastructure they need to grow and prosper. Can the Minister of Intergovernmental Affairs, Infrastructure and Communities share what the government is doing to invest in safer and more efficient water services to help keep our communities healthy, green, and sustainable? The Honourable Minister of Intergovernmental Affairs. Mr. Speaker, thank you very much. I'd like to thank my colleague from Madawaska-Restigouche. Mr. Speaker, by investing in green infrastructure in our communities, we're providing residents with a safe and reliable source of drinking water. That's why our government has invested more than $2.2 million to improve water infrastructure in 2 rural New Brunswick communities under the green infrastructure component in Saint-Hilaire, de Madawaska, and Tidehead. And I think, Mr. Speaker, all members thank the member for Madawaska-Restigouche for his outstanding work.
The honourable member for Kenora.
Mr. Speaker, the IISD Experimental Lakes area in my riding is a state-of-the-art and world-renowned freshwater laboratory. In their latest election platform, the Liberals promised a $37.5 million investment to support their work. Is the government still committed to keeping this promise, and will we see the funding in the next budget?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank my honourable colleague for his question, and I agree with him. It is a very important scientific centre. I find it somewhat ironic that he would ask the question, since it is the Conservative government that cut funding to this very important international experiment. But make sure, Mr. Speaker, that we will be there to continue to finance good science in Canada. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Dufferin-Caledon.
Mr. Speaker, new businesses get no support from this government. It's 2022. We're entering the 3rd year of the pandemic. Did they think no one would open a new business in those 3 years? In my riding, Spirit Tree Cidery is shutting down indoor dining for at least a year. Other businesses in my riding have closed, or they're on the verge of closing. Does this Liberal government not realize they are literally killing new businesses?
Hear, hear. The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, it's really time for the Conservatives to pick a lane and decide what side they're on the big issues facing our country. Half of their questions are about how there is too much government spending and how our government should not be supporting Canadian businesses. In fact, these are the Conservatives who voted against Bill C-2, which provided much-needed lockdown support. And now we're hearing from them that there should be more support? Really, the party of flip-flops, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Calgary Confederation.
Mr. Speaker, last year, Parliament unanimously passed my private member's bill that would help Canadians register as organ and tissue donors through their annual tax return. Support from all parties was an encouraging sign to thousands of Canadians awaiting a life-saving transplant. Sadly, nothing has happened since. The minister has not even given me the courtesy of a response to my request for an update. She owes all the members in this House an update. Will the minister tell us why we have not seen any progress from her or the Canada Revenue Agency?
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With the passage of C-210, CRA will undertake conversations with its provincial and territorial counterparts. Those discussions will take some time, but we're acting as quickly as possible. It's very unlikely that anything will happen before the next tax season, but I thank my colleague for his sustained efforts, and I would encourage him to contact my office for updates, Mr. Speaker.
For West Vancouver, Sunshine Coast, Sea to Sky Country.
Mr. Speaker, the flooding experienced in British Columbia last November was the most devastating agricultural disaster in our province's history. Farmers and food processors suffered extraordinary damages as a result of the extreme weather event. Can the Minister of Agriculture and Agri-Food please update this House on how our government is supporting farmers impacted by the floods in BC?
Honourable Minister of Agriculture.
Mr. Speaker, I thank my colleague for his question. The Government of Canada stands with farmers and communities who are feeling the impacts of extreme weather conditions in British Columbia. Impacted producers will have access to up to $228 million in federal, provincial support to help their farm return to production and support food security in years ahead. We are here to help them do what they do best, producing high-quality food for Canadians and the world.
Bravo.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable Member for Windsor West.
12 days later, the consequences of the convoy are spreading across the country. Things are only getting worse, and the Prime Minister continues to ignore advice from outside his Ottawa bubble. In Windsor, the Ambassador Bridge has been forced to close. This has devastated not only just truckers, but also businesses, residents, and essential workers who cross the border every single day to save lives. The disrespect to our local economy is one thing, but it's clear that there is no plan for border communities, and we want a plan. The NDP has proposed a Safe Border Task Force. It's been ignored for 2 years. Why has this not been acted upon? Why can't we get in front of actually doing the right work and the right thing?
The Honourable Minister for Public Safety.
Mr. Speaker, I want to thank my honourable colleague for his question, and I know his advocacy will be very important in the coming days. He reached out to me earlier, and he and I will be having a conversation. I also want to assure him and everybody in the Windsor area that we are working very closely with CBSA officials who are coordinating both with Windsor Police as well as the Mayor, with whom I've also had contact. There's a full court press to ensure that we keep supply chains moving on the Ambassador Bridge. We've diverted some of those traffic lines to alternate ports of entry, and we'll be sure that we continue to work very closely with all orders of government and law enforcement to get this resolved.
Member for Elmwood Transcona.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Just last week, Statistics Canada reported a job loss of 200,000 jobs during the Omicron wave. That's 200,000 Canadian families that are struggling with a benefit system the Liberals created that's inadequate to the task. It doesn't pay $500 a week. People are waiting far too long to get access if they qualify. And even the special measures that the Liberals brought in just days after passing the bill are set to expire in the next few days. What is the government's plan, and will they work with us to increase the benefit to $500 a month and make sure that all those Canadians out there who are experiencing job loss still as a result of the pandemic actually have access to help instead of...
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I agree that every single lost job is a Canadian tragedy. And that's why I am so pleased that even after the jobs lost in the necessary Omicron lockdowns, Canada has recovered 101% of the jobs lost in the depth of COVID, compared to just 87% in the US. When it comes to support for workers, I would like to say, with the deepest possible respect, that workers are getting support today because of Bill C-2, which I'm sorry to say the NDP voted against.
Now, during question period, we've had some technical difficulties with our reception here, and the honourable member for King Vaughan, I know her question kind of got garbled up, or the answer got garbled up. I'm going to ask the honourable member to repeat her question, and hopefully we'll be able to hear an answer, both because of the technical reparations that were made, and hopefully some of the hospitality that will be displayed in the chamber. The honourable member.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In my riding of King Vaughan, constituents are concerned with keeping their homes. Years ago, I worked in banking and met many people returning their keys to their homes because they simply couldn't afford to make payments with the skyrocketing interest rates. What has this government done to ensure that we don't go back to the 80s and 90s, where we saw many Canadians lose their homes?
Minister for Housing.
Mr. Speaker, our government is focused on making sure that every Canadian has a safe and affordable place to call home. Since 2015, we've invested over $30 billion, introduced the National Housing Strategy, and worked ever closely with provinces, territories, municipalities, the nonprofit and private sector to ensure that more affordable housing and more supply of housing is apparent for Canadians. We know that there's more work to be done. We're working to make sure that we turn more Canadian renters into homeowners through the rent-to-own program and introduce measures to facilitate and accelerate housing supply in partnership with municipalities. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
And I'm afraid that's all the time we have for question period today. C'est tout le temps que nous avons.
That's all the time we have.
It being 3:16 p.m., pursuant to order made on Thursday, November 25th, 2021, the House